Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to some quadratic formula practice. Before we begin this episode, I think we should take a minute just to write down what the quadratic formula is and to understand what the quadratic formula actually does. And so remember, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Take a second, write that down. You're going to need this quadratic formula for every problem we do in this video. Now remember, the quadratic formula is nothing threatening. It's just another way to solve for a quadratic equation. And remember, your basic quadratic equation will always be ax squared plus bx plus c equaling 0. And so what we're going to do for each of these problems is we're going to identify a, b, and c, plug them into the formula, and then simplify. And that's really all the quadratic formula is meant to do. And so let's go and take a look at an example real quick. We've got 2x squared plus 4x minus 7 is equal to 0. Now, why is this one quadratic formula worthy? Well, remember the tools that we have factoring, which this thing will not fall under. This thing is not factorable. Completing the square we could use on this thing. We really could. But remember, if this coefficient is not 1, it's usually a pretty good idea to probably just do the quadratic formula. It would probably be a little bit faster. So let's just go and pump it out. So x is going to be equal to negative, and I always like to just draw in my parentheses first, negative thing plus or minus the square root of a thing squared minus 4 times 2 things all over 2 times a thing. Well, let's talk about what those things are. Well, what's A in the context of this problem? What's B in the context of this problem? What's C in the context of this problem? A is 2. B would be 4. And C, here's where you got to be careful. C is negative 7. It's not 7. It's going to be negative 7. So now we just plug in and make associations. So instead of negative B, it'll be negative 4. Instead of b squared, it'll be 4 squared minus 4a, which is going to be 2, and then negative 7 is c, all over 2a. So again, I just made the associations based on this formula, up top here, this formula, and I made the association into what the problem is trying to get me to plug in. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. This is going to be a little bit harder here. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. So negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 7 is positive 56. And that's going to be over 4. And here's where the problem is going to get a little more difficult. We've got to add some larger numbers here. So I'm going to get negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 56 plus 16. We can go and just do that real quick. So that's a 2, 1, 7. 72 over 4. And now from here, root 72 we can actually simplify. Root 72 can be simplified from root 36 and root 2. Root 36 will become a 6, so what I've got is I've got negative 4 plus or minus 6 root 2 over 4. Now one thing to note, once you get to the end, you want to see, is my fraction reducible? How will you be able to tell? Even, even, even. Because they're all divisible by the same number, I'll go ahead and divide everything by 2, up top and bottom. So negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. 6 divided by 2 is going to be 3 root 2 over 4 divided by 2 is going to be 2. And if I wanted to split this guy up, I would say negative 2 plus 3 rad 2 over 2, and negative 2 minus 3 rad 2 over 2. And that would be our first example of the quadratic formula. Let's go ahead and do another one. If you have to, go and pause. That way you can get caught up. All right, here comes the next example here. Negative 3x squared plus 5x minus 2 is equal to 0. So again, it just looks like it's quadratic formula worthy, right? It doesn't look like it can be factored. So let's just go ahead and plug it in. So it's x equals negative thing plus or minus the square root of a thing squared minus 4 times 2 things all over 2 times a thing. So what are the things in this place? Well, A is equal to negative 3, B is equal to 5, C is equal to negative 2. So we plug those things in to our formula here. So negative B would be negative 5, right? The negative on the outside, then the positive 5. B squared would be 5 squared. Minus 4, A would be negative 3, C would be negative 2. And then all over 2A, which would be a negative 3 again. Whoops, my apologies, negative 3. So, how does this simplify? Well, negative 5 is negative 5, plus or minus the square root of 5 squared is 25. I've got a negative times a negative times a negative, which means this thing's going to end up becoming negative. 4 times 3 times 2 is going to be 24. Over, looks like negative 6. So this one actually is a pretty interesting case here. 25 minus 24 is 1, so the square root of 1 over negative 6. The square root of 1 is actually 1. So I can call him negative 5 plus or minus 1 over negative 6. And then I will go and split him up. So negative 5 plus 1 over negative 6. Negative 5 minus 1 over negative 6. Well, this is going to be negative 4 over 6, which is going to be negative 2/3. This is going to be negative 6 over negative 6, which is going to be 1. Now, when you have two numbers that look like this, what that means is that this original expression here was actually factorable. So we can say that we can say negative, and I'll kick out the negative, and I'll say 3x squared minus 5x plus 2. And if I factor him out, setting him equal to 0, I could say 3x and x minus 2 minus 1. That will get me a 3x. That will get me a 2x, getting me to 5x, which I'm good with. So x equals 2/3 and 1. And I apologize, I just realized I just made a mistake here. This is negative up top and negative on bottom, and which means this guy should be positive 2/3. My apologies. I just realized that after I factored it. So, okay, let's move on to another example. All right, here comes the last example. So again, 7x squared minus 2x minus 8 is equal to 0. Quadratic formula, just pump it out with all the parentheses. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. By now I'm hoping you guys are comfortable with what goes inside each bubble here. So negative 2 minus 4a, which is going to be 7, and c is going to be negative 8, all over 2a, which is 2 times 7. Okay, so now from here, I'm going to get x equaling 2 plus or minus the square root of 4. This is going to be a negative times a negative, so it'll be positive. 4 times 7 is 28 times 8 is 224 over 14. So what I get is 2 plus or minus the square root of 228 over 14. And now I'm going to go ahead and reduce my rad 228. So 228 will actually be 4 times 57. So you get 2 root 57 out of this. He will get replaced by that 2 root 57 after reducing. So I will get 2 plus or minus 2 root 57 over 14. Now again, just like the first problem, notice how we've got even, even, and even. I will go ahead and divide the top and bottom by 2 to reduce the fraction. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1 plus or minus root 57 over 7. And then you would split your answer. So 1 plus root 57 over 7, 1 minus root 57 over 7. And those would be your answers. Alright, I think that will wrap it up for the quadratic formula video. As always, go ahead and just leave any questions or comments in the comments area, and we will answer them in the next class. See ya.